Press start now. Brilliant. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Just letting everyone into the main room, and then we'll be ready to start our webinar this afternoon. So I think that's everyone in. Good. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Simon Newman. I'm the CEO of the Online Dating and Discovery Association. We're the UK trade body representing the sector. We work with platforms, suppliers, policymakers and others to build a safer, more trusted and more sustainable industry. A couple of quick housekeeping points before we get into the detail of today's exciting webinar. First of all, we are going to be recording today's session and it will be shared with everyone who has registered for today's event shortly afterwards. So please look out for an email from us in the next day or two. If you have any questions today, and I strongly encourage you to use the opportunity to ask some questions, please use the Q&A function. I will be monitoring that throughout the webinar today, and we'll be putting your questions to our two wonderful guest speakers at the end of the hour. So please use the Q&A and I'll make sure that we get to those as well. In the event that we run out of time, then I'll make sure that our two guest speakers respond to you as well after today's webinar. So please make use of it how you see fit. So on to today's session. It's one that I've certainly been really looking forward to because it tackles something that I think a lot of you are feeling right now: pressure. Regulatory pressure, reputational pressure, and the very real commercial pressure that comes with operating in a sector that's under increasing scrutiny. So the question we're exploring today is, how do you grow sustainably in that environment? And more importantly, what does that road ahead look like if the industry gets this right versus what happens if we get it wrong? To help us answer that question and more, I've got two fantastic guests: Kev Dawson from MCP Insight and Joanna Cox from aimm, which is the Association for Interactive Media and Micropayments. Between them, they've seen what happens when an industry gets ahead of the curve and what happens when it doesn't. First of all, I'd like to introduce themselves, and Kev, perhaps you'd like to start first and give us a bit of background both on yourself and MCP Insight.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Simon. Kev Dawson, I'm a director of MCP Insight. We are a monitoring, a risk management business. We provide monitoring tools, compliance checks, auditing facilities across a real broad sector, but predominantly focused around mobile and the mobile payment landscape.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Kev. And Joanna.
Yeah, hi there. My name is Joanna Cox. I'm the General Manager of aimm, which, is Simon said, is the Association of Interactive Media and Micropayments. So what on earth is that, you might ask yourself? Well, we're the trade association. We're UK based and we look after the value chain for everyone who offers interactive services to their consumers. And by that value chain, I mean merchants, and they might be digital content providers who are offering their services or products to a consumer. They might be broadcasters who are offering competitions or votes to their consumers, or perhaps charities who are offering text donations to their consumers. So they would be some examples of our merchants. Then we'd also represent the intermediaries in the middle who sort out all the clever techie payment stuff. And also we have the mobile network operators and fixed line telephony operators who allow those their consumers to pick up the phones and make those competition entries or donations or download that content. So everyone in that value chain works together under our trade association to further the sector.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joanna. Wow. And in a slightly different course of action, I'm going to hand the keys over to Kevin now, who's going to ask some questions of Joanna and a sort of a general conversation. So Kev, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I mean, this really came about, actually, it was a conversation with Simon and just talking about the general challenges that ODDA members were facing. And one thing that became very prevalent in the last maybe 12 months or so when I've been a member and talking to Simon more of the ODDA, was just around the move at the government level and the level of scrutiny and the demands that's starting to play on the merchants within the dating sector, and just some of that focus and how that's going to drive the requirement of real transparency and accountability. And when we were talking more, I'm thinking, I've walked this walk already in the space that we're coming from. So we chatted with Simon, it made sense, but probably more specifically that made sense to aimm, who will go on and explain, or Joanna will for sure. But we're a trade association formed on the back of this walk that we talk about, how industry is coming under increasing pressure. It starts to become a regulatory pressure as well as an operational pressure. And just what exactly AIM did to come together and what it then became today. So that was kind of where this conversation thread came from. It was a bit of a left field initially, but it does seem to bear some relevance enough to Simon. Interesting to hear that. There's certainly some elements to pick up from that. Um, so whilst I would argue there's synergy between AIM and ODDA and what they do, they're in different sectors of the marketplace. So hopefully it will bring you some real interest from just exactly the steps that we're taking, how that was working. And so firstly, if I can introduce Joanna again, she's the GM for AIM. She just advised you what AIM is made up of. And hopefully she'll bring a little bit more purposeful value and food for thought to my ramblings. But conscious that maybe not everybody will know him in any detail at all. Can you help paint a little picture here, Joanne, if you don't mind, just to give some familiarity to those that can maybe relate back to the circumstances around AIM and why it was formed, or maybe aren't old enough to recall it the first time, and maybe need a little of a jog and a refresh as to why AIM came about, so to speak.
Sure, Kev. There will definitely be some people who are not old enough to know why AIM came to be in the first place, because actually it's sort of nearly 20 years ago that we sort of came into fruition off the back of a sector who was in some desperate trouble, actually. I was in the sector at the time. I wasn't in this role, so I remember it quite clearly. And some of you who perhaps are more around my age will also remember the trouble that I'm referring to. So back in 2007, you might remember that premium rate services hit headlines all over the place due to some very untransparent practices that were going on by broadcasters in terms of winners of competitions or outcomes of votes. And it felt that sort of the production companies were perhaps more inclined to make good TV than they were to follow the transparent sort of rules and regulations that were in place that actually at the time were fairly light touch. And at that time, each broadcaster was working really quite separately with nothing tying them together as a cohesive unit. They were just competitors, and each one was trying to make a better show than the other. So when these headlines hit, premium rate was all over the front pages of the newspapers. All the big broadcasters were over the front pages of the newspapers. Actually, what the broadcasters needed was someone to come in and work with them, because the sector had pretty much been brought into some disrepute. So they needed someone to tie them together as a group, start restoring those good practices, and as such, consumer trust in a sector that had been hugely badly damaged. And there are still some hangovers to this day. I think some people hear the phrase premium rate and something, alarm bells ring somewhere. So once you've done that damage, it's very hard to sort of get that reputation back. So what we started initially, I say we, as I say, I wasn't doing this job at the time, but AIM started the Broadcasters Working Group, which actually is still active to this day. We had a meeting last week. All the major broadcasters in the UK are members, including the big radio stations who offer the big competitions and the votes and so on. They come together as a group and work as candidly as possible, obviously commercial confidences notwithstanding, to ensure excellent levels of self-regulation over and above what the regulators insist on, to ensure that consumers can really trust their interactive services and enjoy using them, which of course leads them to use them again and repeat purchase. So, it did take a big crisis to bring the group together, but actually the group today thrives because it's hugely valuable to be able to work together to further not just commercial opportunities, but consumer protection initiatives. And that's resulted in a sector now that, talking to the regulator about a year ago, I asked them, could you give us some numbers on complaints in the last 5 years? And in the broadcast sector, the complaint numbers to the regulator were zero. So, it's been a long 20 years, and we still keep working together. But yes, that's Kev, a sort of long-winded way of telling you how it all came to be.
No, no, but it was quite a story, and I am old enough to recall it as well. So it was quite an upheaval. There was a lot of uncertainty to the point of literally an industry sector, literally at knife edge almost of finishing and closing. I think from what you've just mentioned there, some of the key parts there was that it was the coming together to create a level of um, it was a self-regulatory mindset first and foremost, because the pressure was inevitable, that the regulatory bodies were closing in almost in the sense of let's just stop this. This is just carnage. And it was the formation of that and creating a structure which was then visible and transparent across the sector, right across the marketplace, that everybody could see, hold each other to account, while still, of course, maintaining commercial confidences, as you mentioned, because everybody was fiercely competitive and fighting for share. Um, and I just the reason I think that was important as a precedent there was just I think it does help set those parallels with maybe I'm rightly or wrongly see where the dating sector is now. There's lots of good things going on, lots of self-regulation. I'm sure it's happening already, but there is questions getting asked, and well, what about this exception? And some mislabeling as well, where people talk in a very, very generic sense, and there's actually very clear verticals and differentiations between different players. And it just reminds me of exactly where the market was 10 to 20 years ago and still isn't to some regard now. So thank you for that, Joanna. Sorry I asked you to literally almost explain your experience in history for 20 years, but I think it's really useful. But looking at kind of what the problem was that AIM were looking to solve around that time, what risks were faced in the industry then, both from a commercial and a regulatory perspective for those that were AIM members?
Yeah, I mean, from a commercial perspective, the sector completely closed down for a time, and some broadcasters haven't actually recovered. So there are some of the main broadcasters, one in particular, that has never come back to running premium rate in any meaningful way. The other broadcasters and some of the radio stations now, are full steam ahead. They're running their interactive services, and consumers are absolutely loving using them. But actually, it did completely close the sector. Every single broadcaster pulled every single one of their premium rate services from air, pending investigations. And actually, they took a really, really long time to bring them back. And actually, in order to bring them back, those investigations had to be fully concluded, and they sort of had to go to Ofcom and lay it all out on the table and explain exactly what had happened. And there were some huge fines bandied about at the time, millions of pounds bandied about at the time, which is a lot of money now. 20 years ago it was even more money. So from a commercial perspective, it was hugely damaging in terms of revenue, and in terms of fines that were given. And obviously from a regulatory perspective, what it brought in was an absolutely slamming regulatory regime. So what Ofcom did was brought in a license variation for the broadcasters to say, in order to now run interactive services every year, you have to have an independent audit. You have to have someone come in and audit a technical end-to-end audit with some random competitions or votes, interactive services pulled out, and it has to be a completely forensic audit, and you have to report those findings every single year. And that still happens every year now.
Indeed, exactly. And I guess it was literally a move from, some might argue, the Wild West without the regulation to an almost conformed state where there was no middle ground of misinterpretation. And that was really all just about driving sector trustworthiness back into the marketplace. And of course, we're talking about major brands, both on a national and also in some cases international or global level, talking the biggest broadcasters. So there was no space for compromise. And I think that really does highlight the difference and the value of doing some level of self-governance, self-regulation, due diligence prior to this coming around. Because the first thing that will happen when the regulators do come to the table and start prying and asking questions and creating legislation for a particular sector is, so what is the current state? What do you do now? And while they go through consultation, not only ideas, but also evidence of is going to be pretty key, I think. So that was really important. So how did that collaboration work? Because it sounds like I know you're in a slightly different role, but you were within the sector. I mean, it's very difficult to get competitors to come together and then collaborate on something where everybody's really looking after their own interests. The marketplace was on an edge. So if you don't mind, can I just get a bit of guidance on how AIM helping that, does that actually work?
Yeah, of course. There were individuals at every single broadcaster who were asked by Ofcom to become the responsible person at that broadcaster, and they were the person who was on the hook should anything go wrong. Imagine being that individual, right? They were actually quite keen at that point to start working as a group, to start saying, right, we need some help. How can we be better? We've all done our audits, we've done our independent verification, but actually, we can't keep competing in such a way that's damaging to the sector. How can we work together? So we are very fortunate at AIM to have that whole value chain that I described under our umbrella. So not just the broadcasters, but also the payment intermediaries in the middle, and also the mobile network operators and fixed line operators, which meant that, for every sort of technical issue or, consumer issue, whatever, everyone in the chain was actually able to look at a challenge or a barrier to growth and work out if there was a piece of the puzzle that they were best able to solve. So it might be perhaps there was some technology at a network operator that opened up to allow aggregators to offer merchants something that would, make the process more transparent, perhaps for consumers. And because everybody's there in the same room, you can communicate really effectively, and progress is much, much faster because you're all sitting down, you're all trying to solve the same problem. And equally, in responding to regulatory consultations, one thing we have seen in the last 20 years is consultation after consultation after. It's been relentless in terms of regulatory consultations. Having a collective voice that covers everyone in the value chain ensures that kind of everyone is protected from very onerous regulation that actually doesn't work, because if you've got the whole value chain talking together as a collective voice, then the regulator, does tend to be a little bit more amenable to those comments and that feedback.
And actually, I was thinking kind of how does that collaboration actually look in practice? Because it sounds really straightforward, right? But everyone's got an agenda and everybody has a voice and everybody wants to express that voice, whether that's concern or support. So, I mean, what does it take to align all those different players and competitors? And I guess that challenge often sat at the foot of AIM to try and bring the collaboration in a constructive way that was meaningful.
Yeah, and certainly, Kev, you always help by bringing along biscuits to a meeting, because when people are hungry, they don't really want to collaborate. But in all seriousness, actually, it can be tricky, but actually it can also be really straightforward if everyone is coming to the table open to the idea of compromise. So what you have to work out kind of as a group is what the minimum is that you can all agree to, and work up from there. And at the center of all of those sort of talks and negotiations was consumer trust, because that's what had been damaged. That's what we needed to bring back together. So if everybody is aligned on consumer trust, it makes it easier. It's always worth reminding everyone of the aims of the group when you sort of first meet together, and sort of keep bringing it back to that consumer trust. But yeah, if you've got the right people with the right mindset at the table, then actually it can be pretty straightforward.
And again, I'm speaking from a position of having been in this environment at the time, but for the audience who may be not so familiar with some of the clear instances that happened, could you bring any maybe real world example of the impact around AIM, and maybe how AIM worked with government or with regulators to help really shape an outcome?
Yeah, I mean, we work with government quite a lot. Bizarrely, premium rate, not being a massive sector, we sort of have tons of touch points into government departments. So there are lots of examples, really. I did mention regulatory consultations. We just had last year a huge change of regulator from Phone Paid Services Authority to Ofcom. Obviously, Ofcom were really big and frightening, and that was a huge consultation that everybody worked on in order that our voices be heard on what the regulatory framework looked like. Also, the BEIS, oh gosh, what does it stand for? Business Engineering Industrial Strategy. I think it's something like that.
Very good. Yes.
Possibly. They had a consultation on reforming competition and consumer policy. And you certainly tend to have more sway with those sorts of government departments when you have voices, brands, numbers behind you, and when you can talk sort of with a collective voice. More recently, sort of in the last year or two, there was a big government white paper that came out looking at gambling related consumer harms. And there was a lot of scrutiny all of a sudden on prize draws because of the sort of launch of all of these massive online prize draws that you might have seen on TV, where you win a big house and all these sorts of things. So suddenly prize draws were under massive scrutiny. And this is probably a really good example, because as a group of broadcasters who had been offering competitions for many years, and as I said, with zero complaints over the last 5 years, what we did was wrote our own best practice guide to operating prize draws. And that demonstrated a commitment to consumer protection and transparency that actually went much further than sort of what was being looked at in this government white paper. And what it meant was, when the government then commissioned further research into prize draws, they wrote to me and said, actually, we're going to carve your sector of broadcast competitions out, because we're completely satisfied from the work you've done that there is no risk of consumer harm here. So we're not looking in your direction. That's a really delightful
Yeah.
example where the collaboration just came to,
I
shape
mean,
an outcome that was spot on.
sorry, Joanna, sorry to interrupt you there. I thought you'd finished. But you're right. That's a big high five, right? I mean, the government actually carved you out as an exception to the what they've commissioned in regards to what they're looking into. So that's just kind of a clear, meaningful demonstration of where it really works. It's really impactful when you come together. Um, So what do you think? I mean, this this is crystal ball time maybe, but would you? I mean, maybe it wasn't, because things were really at quite a bad point. But what would that outcome have looked like if the industry really hadn't been involved in coming together?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know, as you say, but the risk with any big regulatory intervention or any sort of government focus, or government consultations, is there are likely to be gaps in knowledge at the top, meaning a risk of sweeping disproportionate regulation simply due to a lack of understanding. So one of the other things we would do as a trade association is research. Years ago, there was a subscription services consultation, and we produced a lot of consumer research into that, garnered by our members, who went out to their customers, that facilitated a complete U-turn in a potentially catastrophic regulation around opt-ins for renewals. Um, uh, so I guess if industry don't get involved, then at every turn the outcome could look different. If you do nothing, you can risk everything.
Yeah, that's a harrowing way of putting it, but it's absolutely that. It's yeah, the choice to do nothing comes with everything going. You touched on subscription models, and particularly around how that aligned with the consumer trust and the thinking around policy to that. Subscriptions are a big topic across most digital industries right now. Has there been any key learnings from AIM's work, specifically around the kind of subscription model region? Subscription model area, please.
Yeah, I mean, the phone paid services sector, the premium rate sector, is super heavily regulated in this area anyway, because, again, you will have heard maybe 10, 15 years ago, people saying, oh, I'm getting this on my phone every month and I don't know what it is. And maybe it's a subscription scam. And, actually now most things are bought on subscription, right? Including like cat food and razors and all manner of stuff. But yeah, we're really heavily regulating that area anyway. But actually, when BEIS were doing their consultation on subscription services, we made sure that we got our foot in the door really early. We offered to talk to them about the PRS, the phone paid services area. And again, as a collective voice, we presented a best practice document. This is how we do it in our sector. And the resulting consumer journey, and the fact that we'd had an absolutely massive drop off in complaints. So it was sort of reassuring them that actually over here in this sector, we'd already done the hard work. And once again, any disproportionate regulation wouldn't just be kind of unnecessary, it would actually be damaging because the work had already been done. So it was kind of like, you don't need to waste your time over here. You can go and look in the direction where, potentially it needs more of your attention.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because you literally had that reference point. You could evidence the drop in the complaint levels, and that you had already addressed the issues that they may be thinking around adding further regulation to. So I think that's really key. Um, But then how do you strike that? And it is a very difficult balance between regulation, protecting consumers, but then from your merchants who are your members, maintaining that viable commercial model. I mean, that is a very difficult balance, I would imagine, that you have to juggle all the time.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really tough one because, you will always get people who want to come in, make a load of money, do a load of damage, and then off they pop, right? And they've left a trail of chaos in their wake. But actually, if you want to be in the sector for the long run, then you have to have a model that consumers like and that will not attract customer complaints. Otherwise, you risk the longevity of your service and ultimately damaging your sector.
Yeah.
So, compliance is such a kind of dull word, but it shouldn't be a distant second to your commercial aspirations. It should all, be as important, equally as important in your planning of your services.
Yeah, and you're right. It is. That's it. I mean, from a compliance house, we would argue the same, but it is. It's that parallel. It's almost integral now. There is no afterthought towards regulation and compliance. It actually needs to be at the forefront of your planning, your strategy, whether that's individual campaigns on that much wider scale, and new markets and nuances that new market. So we are singing from the same hymn book on that one, Joanna, for sure. Um, Trying to bring it back to dating, and maybe I'm moving you a little bit out of your comfort zone, Joanna. So please plead absence if you wish. But understanding what you may already around what's happening in the dating sector, what kind of feels familiar to you then within that?
I don't know the dating sector phenomenally well. I mean, I don't know it well, let alone phenomenally well. But what I can see is a sector that potentially is facing change. And I know that our sector has worked through so many regulatory changes. And I guess where the comparison would lie is, you have to adapt to stay afloat time and time and time again. This sector, it has got smaller, but actually the people who are in it now who are thriving are the people that have moved with those changes, been adaptable, been flexible, worked hard to keep their consumers happy and returning to them. And they've done that by working together as a collaboration. So I can see how, in the dating sector, if changes might be coming, they can be frightening, but actually embrace them as much as you can. But I would say don't stay silent if something doesn't make sense, because there is strength in numbers and a collective voice is really powerful.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, I won't labor on about dating because I know it's not a space that you or I have a specialist in at all. Um, But from a more generic point of view, are there any early warning signs or patterns maybe you would encourage members of this industry to focus their attention to, that learnings you could give maybe from what you've seen the walk from?
Yeah, I mean, we know there's changes that are going to be coming to subscription models. We've had early warning on that. So, I've been looking at what those changes might be now, and I'm already asking questions of them, even though we know there's guidance coming, potentially for spring next year. I'm looking at now and I'm asking questions now because by the time that guidance comes out, it's kind of decided. So, don't leave it till tomorrow. Just as soon as you know there's something coming, start looking into it, start talking to people in your sector about it. And if you need to come together and work on it together, then yeah, I would say always try and get ahead of what's coming down the path.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is that. I think it's like getting in front of those changes, being ready and prepared for what it may come and the potential curves that may come from that first thinking. That's certainly what I can experience from my recollection as well. And kind of maybe moving on to where I'm trying to think of this word. What role do you think visibility and insight plays in making that possible? Because we have endless amounts of tools available to us in every marketplace, I think, and we've focused as an organisation at MCP to the dating sector because we feel there's relevance and synergy with the tools that we bring. But maybe you've walked that walk, you know MCP's tools already from the niche that you're in. What role do you think they can play to kind of help this process of getting ahead of the curve and being ready?
Yeah, visibility and insight, when you're assessing forthcoming risks, they're not just nice to have. They separate reactive firefighting from proactive control. We're all about the proactive control. So your visibility, you're seeing what's happening or what's about to happen or what you know is coming down the line across your environment. If you don't have visibility, risks tend to show up late, often after they've already started causing damage. So keep your visibility strong. Look about, talk to people, see what's coming down the line. Insight, of course, is then what turns that visibility into understanding and action. It's the interpretation of it. It's the asking questions. It's the talking to your peers around you and decided what matters versus kind of what's noise that doesn't matter. And the two really work together. If you've got strong visibility and strong insight, you've got early detection, prioritization, and that helps with confident decision making and when to make a stand. So I would say that visibility tells you what's changing, and insight tells you kind of why it matters and perhaps what you should be doing about it.
Yeah, no, good. And you're almost reading the MCP script book. Thank you. I mean, I guess in real terms, it almost becomes somewhat obvious that within industries, those that take the proactive approach, those that are looking at the collaborative approach, you would think would be in a better place. But there is also, these things take time, it takes resources, it's commitment. Do you have any evidence or examples of that actually providing a stronger commercial position in the long term in taking these steps? And if that is the case, any understanding why that might be? Maybe it's a bit of what you just said, but
yeah, I mean, when it's done well, industries that take a proactive, collaborative approach usually do end up in a stronger commercial position over the long term. And actually, I can think of from our working group, one of the major broadcasters and one of the major radio stations that 10 15 years ago would have not looked at each other are now actually working together on a project because they realized that actually bringing two massive brands together in this particular project rather than fighting with each other brings in all manner of sort of new players, but that's one example. But working collaboratively, it reduces risk before it can cause damage, because actually what you're doing is you're shaping the rules, you're writing those best practices instead of reacting to the regulation around them. And by doing that, by shaping those rules, by going sort of over and above as a group collective, it can really build trust, not just with customers, but actually with the regulators. And we find now that the regulators often approach us to ask us, there's a theme of concern or what's your view on this? And actually that can really accelerate learning within the regulator, which means that you don't get those kind of sweeping rules come crashing down on you that you have to react to. But also, it can accelerate innovation as well. I would say, in short, that if you're working collaboratively, you're not weakening competition. I would say it raises the quality of the competition.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Joanna, and you've touched on so many points. I should leave you alone first of all because I put you on the spot a lot. But I mean about the position of taking a proactive stance versus reactive, the value of collaboration, even within a fiercely competitive environment. And a lot of that is just about the education piece with the regulator, helping shape things in a positive and fair way. And I think that also is about building that instilled trust, whether that's to the consumer, to the regulator, to the wider marketplace. So, Joanna, you've given me of insights. To everybody else, I hope there've been some quite remarkable insights and experiences that they can reflect on beyond this. Thank you for your time, Joanna, and certainly for your willingness to share both interesting and relevant insights. I kind of ran out of questions. Simon, if you are in the background, I don't know if there have been any questions come into the session because I haven't looked, or whether anything's been presented.
I've got a few and some comments as well, which I thought I'd share with you. But I mean, fantastic, Joanna. I mean, it's interesting, nodding lots. I was through your answers to Kev's interrogation,
I know.
but
I know.
some real similarities with our sector. That point about trying to be, very proactive with government to, avoid, and I wrote down here the words, that knee-jerk reaction of policy making, where there are assumptions made which are often wrong, and we end up with regulation or rules that arguably cause us more difficulty than the problem they're originally trying to solve. And ironically, only last week, one government department, who shall remain nameless, approached me having read a public report and just put two and two together and thought, well, that's the dating sector. sector without really looking at what the data looked like underneath. So again, there was an element of, here we go again, having to try and correct, or at least try and ensure that government and regulators have a better understanding of the sectors that we work in. So I think that's really crucial as well. And I was just going to ask, actually, Joanna, sorry, a quick point that I thought you made earlier, which was really, really good. Again, kind of echoes a comment that was made to us during the chat. Was this point about this gap, perhaps in governments, in terms of how what's the best way of doing this? How do you approach that within your trade association to ensure that government have a better understanding of the issues affecting your sector? Ffwhat's the secret?
I mean, there isn't really any secret other than just relentlessly hounding them. But what we did do with the previous regulator is we worked with them to set up an independent liaison panel. So once a quarter, we met with the regulator, many
Brilliant.
stakeholders from the value chain, sat down with the regulator and talked about complaint levels, new themes of concern, new innovations that were coming through, new things that people wanted to do. And, as much as they thought they were kind of giving us some time in their busy diaries, actually we were going there to educate them, so that, when a bit of new technology came in, they didn't all throw their hands up and go, oh my God, what is this? They already knew it was coming. So I would say, make as many connections in those government departments as possible. And if you can set up sort of, quarterly touch points with them, with as many of your members as possible, it's not always easy to do, but that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something we do already, and we're very fortunate, particularly with Ofcom as the main regulator currently in our sector. We have and to be again, full credit to Ofcom. They are very proactive as a regulator, and work very closely with us. And we'll be at our annual conference later on in the year, again, engaging directly with members and hearing from what they say, which is great. One of the questions as well I was going to ask you, which you mentioned earlier, was just around research. So something the ODDA is in the process of launching is a research hub, which we're really, really delighted about. We've got our first event next week, which is a kind of setting the scene and identifying priorities for that with a view of launching it towards the autumn. How has research kind of helped you? Because for me, that's been a gap in our sector, which is hence the reason for pushing the research hub. But I'd just be interested in, if again, perhaps to Kev's point, there are any anecdotes or examples where research has really helped push your organisation or the causes that you've been supporting with your members.
Yeah, very much so. I sort of alluded to it when Kev and I were chatting. We did a really big piece of research a few years ago around subscription models when the regulator was talking about, at the end of a subscription term, everybody is going to have to opt back in to resubscribe. And so we went out, we're very fortunate. Our members have all got customer bases they can go and ask. I haven't got to find, I'm not walking down my local high street asking people if they've got subscription services. So, we're very fortunate, but obviously you need to tie that together in a meaningful way. You need to be asking the right questions and the same questions. But, pulling together the fact that actually those consumers, when they get a text message on their phone about their subscription, they kind of don't read it, so actually opt-in renewals would have fallen off a cliff. And anyway, the regulator had been absolutely certain this was in. We put together this research and we presented it to them, and they just simply removed that piece, and now it was just a reminder, rather than you have to opt back in. It was a reminder to say you've got a subscription, just so you know, and it will renew in 2 weeks unless you do anything about it. So it sort of turned it on its head. Equally, there's an annual market review that the regulator do every single year, and they use NPS scores. And we hate NPS scores in our sector because if you're entering a competition, I don't know, on a ITV, let's say, and the question around NPS scores is, would you recommend this service? Well, unless you've won, you're probably not going to recommend the service because you've paid your £2 and you haven't won anything. But it doesn't mean it's not a good service, right? It's a great service. So again, we sort of spoke to, we did some research around actually what would be more meaningful questions for this report, because it's a public domain report, and anyone new coming into the sector sees these terrible NPS scores and says, crikey, I don't want to be starting out in this sector. But actually, don't use NPS scores. They're not relevant here. Use meaningful questions about what did people understand their payment journey was going to be like. Did they find it quick and convenient to pay using their phone? Use the right sorts of questions. So we are fortunate. We've got huge customer bases, but of course, your members will have too. So, if you can use those consumers to pull that research together to present to the regulators and the government departments.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, and just you mentioned their subscription contracts. We've been very heavily involved in discussions with the Department of Business Trade and the Competition and Markets Authority and supporting the consultation. I think it's fair to say we, like many other sectors, probably didn't get what we were hoping for when the consultation responses were published and the government's kind of position statement. So we wait to see the guidance ahead of the new rules, which are likely to come into effect from spring from next year, and we'll continue to look at that. So again, a very similar issue. Thank you, John. I'll let you have a glass of water. Well, I perhaps pick on Kevin briefly, and I just wanted to talk about reputation, Kevin, because you mentioned at the beginning about the importance of reputation. Again, reputation can be built and lost very quickly, and we know that one of the areas we've been focusing on as an association is around issues with the financial services sector. So we've had an issue what we call debanking, which is effectively where some of our members and others in the sector have effectively had banking services withdrawn because they're considered or perceived as being too high risk. So I'm just interested from your perspective, what are the things that our members and others in the sector can do just to try and de-risk themselves in some way from a reputational perspective, because it isn't just about banking, it's about other areas as well. It's about confidence, it's about customer trust. All these things are all interrelated in some way, and that ultimately is a big thing for us to address.
Yeah, no, and we've had similar instances within our sector where there's been periods of time where certain sectors of industry, certain genres have been classified differently. So when you go into alternative different payment options, you're classified in a different way. You get different terms, both commercial and operational. And I guess the answer from my side, I guess, is a very typically compliance-led answer, but it's about taking away the emotion. Sometimes there's always a context around morality, but the real thing is it's about standards. It's about consistency. Are you providing a structure and a pillar which is consistent? Is it verifiable? Is it auditable in the way that people interact with you, use you? It's not judging your consumer, but and then it's a hard battle, and we've had that as well with other parts of the mainstream payments where they do classify quite easy. It's adults, and and dating we've often seen is just classified as adults,
That's right.
regardless of the different genres within
Yep.
dating. It doesn't matter; they just classify, and often it's just a battle. It's just saying, well, and almost you can't be so brazen, but and so what? What is the issue exactly? We follow the same standards, the same processes. Our protocols are exactly in line with legislation. We have our own self-regulatory standards. Happy to be audited, happy to open the books and take a look at that. Taking the genres, and I think you just have to break it down. You almost have to put the pillars up to take them away again, because often it's just a morality stance and it's a very generic, lazy labeling, usually. And I just think you have to challenge that, Simon. I think
Yeah.
the examples we had is that they just challenged that and created a record, an audit of consistency to say, actually, does it really matter? This is what really does matter. And that
Yeah,
way,
and I think that's reassuring because that echoes some of the things we've been doing. So, for example, what you mentioned about adult services, you're absolutely right. Online dating is often considered in the same category as adult services. Funnily enough, the Companies House standard industry classification, the SIC codes, it's online dating and escort services. So that's a single. So we also have that issue, which again is very high risk. One of the things we've been working on, and again we'll be publishing later on this year, is a new set of standards for the sector, which effectively we require our members to follow to demonstrate that they are following best practice in certain areas, including these things that banks and financial institutions will look at. So hopefully that will certainly address some of those issues. I mean, I've also reached out to UK Finance as well to say, can we sit down around the table? Let's have a chat. What do you need from our sector? Sadly, not had any response, but we'll keep pushing those things as a way of trying to just de-risk or at least change the perception of our sector as well. So totally get that. I think it's a really crucial point. These are not just things affecting our sector, but others as well. And I guess one of the challenges we have in our sector is that it's not a regulated sector per se. So it doesn't have a single regulator. There's not a single set of rules. Legislation is across a number of different areas, so it can make it quite complicated. And of course, our members almost certainly most of them will operate internationally as well, where there's different jurisdictions and different rules to follow. So that just adds to the complexity of what we're having to operate in.
unfortunately, it is the heavy lifting, Simon. But I think I mean, Joanna used the term. It's the educational piece. It's almost like at every touch point, you have to create the education piece. And where there's needs to create clarification and exception, it's that. Because particularly you talked about classification and payments, they're posting probably every genre within every sector, some
That's
form
right.
of payment. And it's easy for them to have four pillars of categorization.
Yeah.
But the reality is there's probably 2,000. And
Yes.
you just got to make sure you are, if you're not what if you can't create 2,000, create a fifth or a sixth one at least within the subdomain. But that's heavy lifting, Simon. That's
Quite
from
right. But that's what we're here for. That's what
that's
trade associations exist, is to
exactly.
have those discussions on behalf of members. So I totally get that. As we head towards sort of the end of our session, I'm just kind of keen to hear about your practical things that our members can do. So what are the things that they should be thinking about? What can help? And bear in mind, we've got very, very large members with millions and millions of independent users. We've got very small members that are micro businesses with perhaps a few thousand. So we've got the complete spectrum from one end to the other. Again, just welcome sort of feedback. Joanna, perhaps I can bring you in first and then come back to Kev for his thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, what can you do? So, firstly, obviously, you've got to know what's coming, and I'm guessing a lot of that comes from you, Simon, in terms of what's down the road. But actually, keep
My
yourself
crystal ball.
yeah, keep yourself informed, keep yourself educated. Sign up for all those regulatory emails and whatever. Don't be surprised by what's coming down the road. But also, if you can sort of start talking together about, we know, for example, subscription changes are coming. What do we all agree we can do as a minimum to start getting ahead of the game? We know this guidance is coming. Actually, are there things that are really going to be problematic? Because if there are, what can we do as a collective to talk to the government now about this guidance? Because as I said, by the time it comes out, it's too late. They're
Yeah.
writing it now, they're thinking about it now, and these people who are writing this guidance still might not have a full understanding. So I think it's working together to work out where you can get your foot in the door, and where that will make the most difference.
Yeah, it's a great point actually. On the subscription contracts is a really good example. We've been working with the Coalition for App Fairness, which brings in a number of other app developers in different sectors, particularly gaming, news, media, and others as well. And one of the things we suggested is bringing back the working groups that were originally put together when they were developing the proposals, in helping the government and that particular department, civil servants there, draft the guidance. So when it does come out, there are no great surprises. Because we know that as well, the other challenge is that often the guidance comes out and there's a very short lead in time between guidance and the go live date. And that creates additional pressure, additional administrative burdens and cost for compliance, which again we want to try and kick back against. Otherwise, it harms innovation and growth of the sector. So I think that's a really great point, Joanna. Thank you, Kev. Over to you on the same point then.
I guess from what can you do now? I mean, again, I won't go to compliance route of self-regulation and auditing, but I guess the real value could be flipping that from a commercial point of view. If you're a small player, a lot of that is taking learnings, looking at what the best is doing, and by best that isn't just about size. It's about who is performing best in the marketplace based on what they're doing, and using insights and tools and capabilities to do that. And if you're one of the big players, one of the bigger challenges you may have is you'll have levels of outsourcing or third parties delivering parts of the component services of that. So what is the makeup of that? Do you have true transparency, true visibility, particularly if it's a brand and a trust thing and a relationship with the consumer? What brand limitations does that place when you're giving it to third parties? Do you know what they're doing it? How are they using your brand in a consistent way? Are they following your brand guidance? So things like that, which it may be in a contract, but does that mean that's actually what they're doing? And for me, we do them, but there's other people that also provide similar tools that can give you that kind of thing. And I think it's that very proactive approach, where you can say,
Brilliant.
okay, if somebody comes into our organization to look at what we're doing, are you happy to open the book, or open the page of every book? And if you're not, look at the ones you probably can address. We all have, but in real terms, there's those books that you got. Are you comfortable letting somebody read through that? If there was a non-compete element to it, if not, that's probably where you start. What can we do better with that? And I think there's a lot of things out there, suppliers and internal, that you can do to improve.
Yeah, and that's a great sort of point there, just to ask you there, Kev. With people on the call today, maybe thinking, okay, yeah, I've got to be perhaps a little bit more proactive in this, given the volume of regulation and change that's coming down, affecting lots of digital platforms. If they were to approach you, Kev, and say, let's kind of get together and have this conversation in a bit more detail, What does the first few months look like working with you? What sort of things would you do, and how would you work with those organizations?
Typically, it firstly starts with really just what is it they are trying to achieve? Is it a competitive advantage? Is it a technical challenge where they're trying to understand how they do something, or how others are doing something? Is it about new market insights? It's about understanding, going into new regulatory landscapes and understanding what does that look like, and if we did a copy and paste, does that work or not? So we provide a lot of insights of what's already going on in those marketplaces, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We essentially provide a scrape of activity by geo, and then put that into a nice formulated portal where you can scan that in real time, and you can go to real granular levels of not only the advertisement itself, but the makeup of that web page, the technical build, the logs. So you can hit various teams within your business, whether it's product development, whether it's the commercial teams, whether it's marketing, or whether it's customer care and customer service. All those elements can take a part from the value proposition of what we scrape in and package together. But it all starts with, well, what are you trying to fix? What is the driver? And often that is, well, we think we're okay, but we're not sure. So like a lot of it is just, okay, well, have a look around the tool, and then bounce off us. If you're not seeing things you think you wanted to see, tell us that. If you are seeing things you want more of it, tell us that, because whilst we are very generic in our initial thing, we've run a whole lot of bespoke in behind that, a lot of bespoke reporting, a lot of collation of data from numbers of sources away from just the general engine scraping. So a lot of it is just about understanding what they're trying to achieve. But the first onboarding is, we should be adding value to seeing you more than you currently see. And if you are seeing it already, probably doing it more efficiently because of just the scale in which we're capturing data.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I guess the message there, isn't it? It's about being prepared for things that we can reasonably expect will be coming down the line over the next few years, but also for arguably what could be unexpected. And I think it's quite interesting if we look, certainly in the UK, there's been a lot of knee-jerk policy making in relation to the Online Safety Act, isn't there? And we've been talking recently internally about what else might come down the line in the next 6 months. Government may well consult on certain things, but it sounds like they've also formulated their own ideas already on what solutions may look like. So again, just being prepared for that as in the best way you can, as you say, hopefully then irons out some of those headaches that will come further down the line. So really good advice. And of course, everyone joining us today, both Kev, I'm sure we'll send your details out to everyone. So please reach out and contact Kev and Joanna if you're happy as well. That'll be really helpful. Well, look, we've got a few minutes left. If anyone does have any questions, now is the chance to ask them. But I guess if not, just to say a massive thank you for a really insightful conversation today. I think, Joanna, it's been really helpful to learn how other trade associations approach, what are arguably many similar issues. And it's interesting, isn't it? We obviously think about working more collectively with other sectors, but perhaps not so much with other trade associations. Then maybe there's a message there in doing things
I think there
together,
is.
because
There
the issues
is.
are arguably the same. They affect
We will
our
stay in
members.
touch.
There we go. So there's something I've taken away from today, as well as that point about education and awareness. Keep plugging away with government and making sure that we are raising awareness of those core issues that are affecting us and our members, and the hope that that they start thinking about those things at the very beginning part of policy development, rather than, as you say, when it's too late and we get a fairly polished set of guidelines or regulations that we have very limited opportunity to influence. So I think there's some really valuable takeaways from that as well, which is great. And Kev, I think some great advice as well in terms of compliance and the steps that you can take to make sure that you're keeping ahead of the curve and all of the things that are coming down the line as well. So really helpful. So I'm just going to give you an opportunity for a last word each. Perhaps Joanna, I'll start with you, and then Kevin, I will give you the last word before we finish for today.
Okay, yeah. I think one of the things I've learned since I've been in this job is, and you'll know, Simon, is you look running a trade association. So, people look to you to, bring people together, have the collective voice. But actually, I do not know everything. In fact, in a lot of instances, I don't know anything. So something about, that I haven't really mentioned about collaborative working is actually there's a chance to just learn from the people around you, because, I can read a piece of guidance and think, looks okay to me, the person next to me says this is hugely problematic.
Absolutely.
I'm just one person, you're just one person. So actually, yeah, use your trade association, use your competitors actually to help build your knowledge, and actually make the sector more intelligent together.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And as I said, we work with quite a few other organizations and in cross different sectors because they will have a different understanding of the same issue, and it's important to just learn and see whether that does affect us in the same way. So really valuable advice. Kev, last word.
Okay, well, I firstly for Joanna, I know it was interrogation style questioning, but I know that the depth of knowledge that you've had, Joanna, and I just really wanted this new audience for you and I, Joanna, to kind of just tap into that. So thank you for that, Joanna. In regards, I mean, we've waved the banner a little bit for 12 months around who MCP are. So if your organization is looking for further insights specific to your sector, please reach out to us, have a chat. We're genuinely friendly, happy to jump on board, always looking to run some beta things with new players, just so we can shape things right for your sector for the long term. So it's a bit of a commercial sell, but yeah, please don't hesitate to reach
Brilliant.
out, have a look at our platforms and what it gives you, and yeah, we'll work with you to make that better for everybody.
Great stuff. Well, look, just lastly from me, thank you once again to Kev and to Joanna for a fascinating webinar today. We will, of course, this is being recorded. We'll send a copy out to everyone who's registered today, as well as the contact details. Please pick up the phone to Kev, drop him an email, visit the MCP website, find out more about how they can support you, and let's see how we can get on and make sure that our sector, at the very least, is well protected against an increasing volume of regulation and policy and everything else that's coming out from government and regulators, not just in the UK, but internationally as well. So thank you once again. And I hope everyone else has a wonderful afternoon. We'll be back very soon with another webinar. And thank you once again to Kev and Joanna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.